This is TWiT.
We all understand the critical importance of the Internet's trust model,
Yes.
which, with the caveats we often examine, for the most part works. You know, we've how much fun have we had at the expense of the Hong Kong post office through the years? And you know, my startled discovery of how many certificate authorities were in my old XP system a long time ago is like, oh my goodness. And the fact that, you know, it's a trust all model. Well, okay. So it's got, you know, it's a little creaky, but for the most part, it works. We trust that we have established a private connection to a website because of the HTTPS certificates presented by the server, which are automatically verified by our browser and are rejected with glaring warnings if anything at all seems wrong. Our browsers are very careful to remind us when we encounter a problem, such as an invalid certificate. And I'm sure we've all, from time to time, like encountered a site whose certificate expired a day or two before. And it's like, you know, it just happened to me, I don't know, a week ago. I was going somewhere and I got like a warning, and I checked. I looked at the certificate. It's like, oh yeah, that was the day before yesterday. Well, I'm sure they know they need to get a new certificate. You know, but mostly we're protected. So we enter our credit card numbers, we interact with our banks, and essentially trust these technologies to keep us safe. So that explains why a fundamental flaw, a deep and serious flaw in the Windows OS cryptographic API that is the component responsible for doing that work, such that certificates could be spoofed, caused quite an uproar. It's being tracked as CVS 2020-0601, and it has upset the easy trust that we've developed in the model that we have. The good news is this upset is not the result of some fundamental flaw that's been found in the public key infrastructure, but this particular implementation on some Windows systems is flawed in a way that allows it to accept a spoofed certificate when it should not. So, as we know, last Tuesday, Microsoft issued a certificate update, a security update to fix, and I don't understand still why they call this an important vulnerability. It's like important.
Critical.
Okay.
Critical.
Yeah. I don't get it. But so this is in their crypt32.dll. It was, and what has like caused lots of people to discuss on the internet is the fact that this is the first time the NSA has stepped up and privately reported a vulnerability to a company where they could have used that vulnerability themselves to their own advantage. I mean, they've done that before. They've done that in the past. That's what we learned that the NSA was doing, for example, with Bluekeep, is that, you know, they knew of was it Bluekeep? No, Eternal Blue. Sorry, Eternal Blue. You know, they have used vulnerabilities themselves, kept them quiet, worked to not have them disclosed in order to give themselves an advantage. Maybe it's because they felt this was too critical to like go unfixed. I mean, because this is really bad, and I'll explain exactly how bad next. So the fix to this ensures that the Windows cryptographic API library correctly, completely, properly validates ECC, elliptic curve crypto certificates. So not all crypto certificates, but ECC certificates. Okay, so this flaw, which now has been referred to as, or has been named Curveball, was introduced into Windows, as I mentioned at the top of the show, in July of 2015. It's a spoofing vulnerability in the way the certificates are accepted without a correct verification of the explicit curve parameters provided within certificates. Essentially, the flaw allows an attacker to supply their own generated X.509 certificates, which is the class of certificates all of these are, by using an explicit parameters option to set its own curve parameters. What the NSA wrote was, quote, certificates obtained containing explicitly defined elliptic curve parameters which only partially match a standard curve are suspicious, especially if they include the public key for a trusted certificate, and may represent bona fide exploitation attempts. Okay, so translating that a little more into English, the way for us to think about this is that Microsoft's original code, which has been in place 5 years, was allowing certificates to overspecify their own elliptic curve parameters, which were then used to verify their own signatures. So, in other words, the certificate was being allowed to say both, this is how you verify who I am, and this is who I am. So the flaw affects all of the places where we depend upon trusting certificates, including HTTPS connections, signed files and emails, and signed executable code. In essence, anything that is signed. This was and you can understand why the NSA said, "Holy crap, this is really too awful. If this were discovered independently, you can imagine. I mean, it would be a huge exploit." So they really didn't have any choice. It completely subverted signing, all signatures. So from an adversarial context, man-in-the-middle attacks, you would not have any way of assuring that you were actually connecting to any website that you believed you were, because the signature of the certificate that your browser received would be trusted, unless you were using Firefox, when it should not be. The good news is Windows 7 and Server 2008 R2 in this case, even though they received their final updates last week, they were never vulnerable in the first place. And unlike the famous Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities, which remained even 2 years later essentially theoretical, despite all of the uproar they called, we never had, working exploitable, obvious proofs of concepts. We had, yes, a theoretical cross-process leakage, so in some settings that could be a problem. In this case, immediately upon the disclosure, researchers jumped on this to create and release proof of concept code to demonstrate that the vulnerability can indeed be exploited in the wild. Researchers immediately predicted that it would only be a matter of days, and that prediction turned out to be spot on. The first researcher to prove the vulnerability was exploitable was a guy named Salim Rashid, who developed, or maybe that's a pseudonym, don't know, he developed a proof of concept code that permitted the immediate faking of TLS certificates. And of course, that would allow anybody to create fake websites. He has not shared his code, but he tweeted some visual proof. I have a link to his tweet in the show notes. Then, and we could say, well, okay, but that's a tweet of that could be spoofed. That's true. Immediately on the heels of that came published code from Kudelski Security, and that was followed closely by a Danish researcher, Ollypwn, Ollyypwn. Both now have proofs of concept code up on GitHub. Kudelski calls his the chain of fools because, of course, it's all about certificate chains. That's on GitHub. He also provides on a blog posting that is synchronized with this a complete explainer in addition to a walkthrough his proof of concept code. So the cat is completely out of the bag. This is not theoretical. This is not, oh, maybe someone's going to figure out how to do it. Ollypwn has a nice explainer in his GitHub intro about this. He wrote, CVE 2020-0601, commonly referred to as Curveball, is a vulnerability in which the signature of certificates using elliptic curve crypto is not correctly verified. He says ECC relies on different parameters. These parameters are standardized for many curves. However, Microsoft didn't check all these parameters. The parameter G, the generator, was not checked, and the attacker can therefore supply his own generator, such that when Microsoft tries to validate the certificate against a trusted certificate authority, it'll only look for matching public keys and then use the generator of the certificate. He finishes saying that there's a cert, Microsoft ECC product root certificate authority.cer is by default a trusted root certificate authority using ECC on Windows 10. Anything signed with this certificate will therefore automatically be trusted. And of course, this flaw allows a spoofed signature of that certificate to be readily created, and nobody has any questions now about how to do it. So we have publicly available code and exploitation in the wild. We have publicly available code demonstrating the vulnerability and proof of concept code. Exploitation in the wild by malicious actors will surely follow. Yes, it was patched on Tuesday. Well, we know in practical terms how much good that does. Again, Windows 7 systems that could not be patched, Windows 7 and Server 2008 also received their last patch, but they had nothing wrong with them. They're not broken in this way. Only subsequent Windows 10 and servers. There will be a patch delay. We know that will happen. It always does. There will be servers that will never be patched, which have received code since July of 2015 and then at some point stopped receiving it. This is going to get exploited. This is not good, and that's why this was such a big deal. I'm sure that our listeners have installed the patches and rebooted their systems. They're probably fine. Again, Firefox never trusted any websites using that ECC certificate problem, because Firefox brings its own crypto library along with it. Chrome briefly had the problem, but they were able to update themselves. Chrome updated to 79.0.3945.130. Once again, I had to go into help about, even though I was using Chrome yesterday and today, and it didn't update until I went to help about. Then it said, oh, and then it updated and restarted, and I got .130, and now I know that my Chrome won't accept TLS certs. I think that, however, that's like maybe the minimum of the or a minimization of the problem. This is anything signed. So we trust code signed by trusted signers. Windows trusts code. I did note, although I just saw this in passing and I forgot to follow up on it, that apparently Windows' own Windows Update will not be spoofed by this. Yay. So maybe it uses a different approach. Maybe it's not using elliptic curve signatures. It might be using RSA, a large RSA signature, and so it's not vulnerable. The problem is that there is a vulnerable cert that is in Windows 10, is absolutely trusted, and anything signed with it or spoofed with a spoof signature of it will also be trusted. So that's a problem. So anyway, so I think that the website spoofing problem is less of a concern, although not. I mean, still, for systems not updated, for people using systems not updated, any site can now be spoofed. That's the case. So Windows needs to get fixed, but signatures are pervasive, and we're going to end up seeing some more exploits of this moving forward. So make sure your Windows is up to date, and you're okay.
The crypto curveball.
The crypto curveball.
It's not easy to hit the curve.